Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. So Deep Rock Galactic Survivor just dropped its brand new 1.0 patch 2 hotfix 1, and honestly, there's a lot to unpack here. It might look small on paper, but once you actually get into it, you start realizing how many little quality of life tweaks, achievement fixes, and balance changes are packed into this thing. And trust me, these tweaks can actually make a pretty big difference in how your runs feel, especially if you've been playing regularly since launch or even since early access. So let's talk about what's changed, how it affects your gameplay, and why some of these adjustments are way more important than they first appear. All right, first up, let's talk about the achievements, because this part might seem kind of minor, but if you're the kind of player who loves 100% completion, or you're hunting for those last few stubborn Shivos that just wouldn't trigger properly, this is actually a massive relief. Remember that unreasonable uptime achievement? Yeah, the one that asks you to keep your shield up for what felt like an eternity? Before this hotfix, it required a 60-second uptime, which was kind of brutal. The devs clearly realized that and adjusted it to 30 seconds, which feels so much more balanced. 30 seconds is still a decent challenge, especially depending on your build and the map modifiers, but it's no longer punishing. It's a smart change because it keeps the sense of accomplishment while removing that frustration factor. So now, it's not just luck or a perfect storm of conditions, it's actually achievable through consistent play. Then there's the undercooked achievement. This one's been bugging people for a while because it just wouldn't trigger correctly when you tried to salvage an overclock. You do everything right, follow the steps, and still nothing. That's now fixed. You can finally get credit for it, and it works the way it should. It's a small detail, but you know how annoying it is when you put in the effort and the game just says, nah, not today. It feels so much better knowing that the system's actually keeping up with your progress. And on top of that, the achievements tied to having 6 items of the same rarity have also been updated to count higher rarity gear toward the requirement. This is one of those thank you moments because before, it was kind of weird having the game tell you your legendary or epic item didn't count when technically it should. So now it just makes sense. You've got 6 items that meet or exceed the rarity requirement, and the game acknowledges that. Logical, smooth, and fair. Perfect. Now let's move to the mission tweaks, because this part is actually really interesting, especially for anyone who's been farming specific objectives. The BUB 33 missions had a pretty annoying issue where sometimes you'd get stuck with 2 stages instead of 1, even when it wasn't supposed to happen. That's been corrected now. You'll only get the intended single stage, which is a nice bit of pacing cleanup. It makes those missions feel tighter and less of a slog, especially in mid to late game runs when pacing really matters. Another small but clever adjustment. B033 will now only activate if there's fuel available. Before, you could hit a scenario where you're triggering objectives with no fuel to actually complete them, which was a waste of time and a little immersion breaking. That's sorted now. It's one of those quiet fixes that improves the flow of gameplay without anyone even realizing how much smoother it feels until they experience it. Alright, here's where things start getting spicy. Balance changes. These are the tweaks that affect how your builds perform, and even though it's labeled as a hotfix, there's some meaningful stuff here. Let's start with Elimination Gate 2. The devs clearly wanted to fine-tune this area because they made a few thoughtful adjustments. The mandatory pep talk now gives you plus 10% XP and 100 max HP. That extra bit of health might not sound huge, but it gives you a little more room for mistakes in those chaotic fights. You know those moments when you're kiting enemies and just trying to keep your health bar from evaporating? That extra buffer makes a real difference. Plus, the XP boost keeps progression feeling rewarding even in tougher sections, so you're not slogging through without a sense of growth. And as part of the same change, the Omega Mini Exploders mutator got swapped out for Serrated Claws 2. That's interesting because Omega Mini Exploders could be brutal. They were one of those modifiers that could suddenly turn a run from manageable to absolute chaos. Serrated Claws 2 still adds some pressure, but it's more about sustained danger rather than random burst deaths. It keeps the challenge alive, but with a bit more predictability, and I think that's a great design choice. Then we've got one of the coolest tweaks in this patch, the buff to the Voltaic Stun Sweeper. This weapon got its base damage increased from 48 to 55, and its potency went up from 20 to 22. It might sound like a small bump, but in practice, that's a pretty significant buff, especially if you're running a build that revolves around stuns or electric status effects. The Voltaic Stun Sweeper has always been one of those tools that sits just on the edge of being truly great. It's good, but sometimes it felt like it fell short in the damage department, making you question whether it was worth using over other options. With this change, it's way more viable now. The extra potency means you're stunning enemies more effectively, keeping crowds under control, and setting up better kill windows for your other weapons or abilities. You can actually feel the difference when you're surrounded. The control and the feedback loop of stunning and killing feels smoother and more satisfying. And then there's the Breach Cutter. This one's a quieter but still meaningful change. It's now been tagged as lasting. For players who pay attention to weapon modifiers and tags, that's actually a pretty big deal. It changes how certain bonuses interact with it, and it might open up some interesting synergies with other gear or abilities. The Breach Cutter already has a unique rhythm and a satisfying skill curve. It rewards precise play and timing, and with this tweak, you can start thinking about new build paths that keep it relevant deeper into your runs. It's always nice when the devs take the time to make older weapons feel fresh again. What's cool about this hotfix overall is that it shows the dev team's ongoing attention to detail. None of these changes are flashy or headline-grabbing, but they're all focused on making the game smoother, fairer, and more enjoyable to replay. That's something Deep Rock Galactic Survivor has always done well. It's not about reinventing the wheel every patch, it's about tuning what's already there so it feels better with each update. You can tell they're listening to feedback too, because most of these adjustments clearly came from player reports and discussions. Fixing achievement triggers, adjusting mission pacing, tweaking the difficulty curve on specific gates, those aren't random. Those are the kinds of fixes you only make when you're paying close attention to how people are actually playing. From a gameplay perspective, these changes subtly shift the meta too. That Voltaic Stun Sweeper buff might encourage more players to experiment with electric and stun builds again, especially since crowd control is so valuable in late-game situations. The Elimination Gate 2 tweaks could also change how people plan their runs, since it's slightly less punishing now, but still challenging enough to keep you alert. You can experiment a little more with builds instead of sticking to the safe meta setups, which keeps things interesting. And let's not overlook the achievement and mission tweaks. They might seem like behind-the-scenes stuff, but they actually keep players engaged longer. When your progress feels consistent and the game rewards your time properly, you're way more likely to stick around and keep playing. There's nothing worse than feeling like the game doesn't recognize your effort, so fixing those achievement issues is a morale boost for completionists and casual players alike. Another thing I've got to say is how this update continues the trend of balancing risk and reward in Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. This game has always thrived on that feeling of calculated chaos, pushing your luck, trying to squeeze out a little more XP, a little more loot, and hoping you don't get overwhelmed. The devs know that sweet spot between challenge and frustration, and this hotfix is another step in maintaining that balance. By trimming down some of the more punishing or inconsistent mechanics while slightly boosting others, they're keeping that loop engaging without letting it slip into either boredom or rage territory. It's also just reassuring to see how quickly they respond to community feedback. The game's still fresh after its 1.0 launch, and post-launch support like this shows a lot of care. These aren't lazy band-aid fixes, they're thoughtful tweaks that show they're paying attention to how every little system interacts. It makes the game feel alive, like it's evolving with the player base. And honestly, that's one of the best things a developer can do for a game like this. It's got that replayable roguelike loop that can either live or die by how responsive the updates are, and right now they're absolutely on the right track.